Here's a question for you. How much is bad customer support really costing your business? Not just in refunds and returns, but in things like lost trust, damaged reputation, and those silent customers who never ever complain. They just disappear. And that's what we're talking about today on Marc Haine Live. Welcome to this episode of Marc Haine Live. This is where small business owners and entrepreneurs pick up core skill sets to create the show-stopping, jaw-dropping experiences that your customers and your employees deserve. I am your host, customer and employee experience strategist Marc Haine, and today my guest is customer experience leader Charlotte Ward. And today we're going to be talking about the side of the business that can really make or break your brand, where a single mishandled interaction could undo months of hard-won loyalty. So, what's the secret to turning support from the necessary cost into your best tool for customer retention? Well, stick around because this episode is just for you. My one request is that you make sure that you subscribe to this episode or this podcast, and please make sure that you share it with your circle. I'd love to see the business community really supporting the work that I've been doing for 215 episodes. So please go ahead, make sure that you share links to this to people who could really use the information. I'd like you to put on your thinking cap for a second. You're running a tight ship. Your marketing is on point and customers seem to be rolling in. Life is good. But then something goes horribly wrong. It's a product issue or a billing error or just a simple question that leads to a complex maze of support calls and emails. The customer, once loyal, now feels overlooked and super frustrated, and they slowly but surely drift away. We often focus on how to get customers in the door, but what about keeping them once they are with us? And that brings me to our question of the day. So, when customers reach out for support, are you confident that your team is making their day, turning the tides, helping them be satisfied with whatever they're doing, or could you be losing them without even knowing it? I'd love to get your impression and get your ideas on this. Go ahead and share this episode on your favorite social media platform, hashtag it Experience Leadership, and please be part of this conversation. I'd love to have an interaction with you. As I mentioned today, I am absolutely thrilled to welcome somebody who spent nearly 30 years transforming the world of customer support from the ground up. Charlotte Ward is a true expert who's seen it all, from the front lines of high-pressure call centers to leading remote, highly technical support teams. Currently, she's the director of support at Snowplow and the host of the Customer Support Leaders podcast, where she shares her deep insights into building customer relationships that last so hard. Charlotte's passion? Helping businesses just like yours understand that exceptional customer support isn't just a nice to have, it's a powerful driver of loyalty, reputation, and growth. And today she's here to share the real measurable impact of support done right. And I think we're all in for some eye-opening moments. Charlotte, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. Lovely to be on the show. Thank you.
Thank you for making time. Hey, could you maybe start off a little bit about talking a little bit about how you serve your customers? Who are your customers, and how do you help them?
Yeah, so at Snowplow is a very, very technical platform. We're essentially a customer data infrastructure at heart. So we take behavioral data from our customers, tracked across multiple different technologies, video, in product, mobile, web, all of those interactions with customers. We get the data from those, all of that behavioral data, we enrich it, we ensure its quality, and we land it in the data warehouse in a timely manner. And we do that across a number of different technologies, a number of different cloud infrastructures, and we interface, downstream to multiple technologies as well, multiple platforms where we can land data warehouses, data lakes, real-time streams, etc. So it's deeply, deeply technical support, and that's kind of the landscape my team operates in. So this isn't this isn't a high volume type of support. This is really consultative, where we build relationships with customers and we get an understanding of how they're using the product and what we can do to help them on that journey.
I love that. And so, you know, just before the call, we were talking about the use of AI and how, your team, it really brings a kind of personal touch to that because it's not AI based.
Yeah, exactly. In this kind of environment where it's a highly novel sort of experience. Like every ticket is different almost. We have very low repeatability on our questions. We can't rely, and also, the discovery for solving each of those questions and those problems and challenges is pretty high, and you
Mhm.
can't rely on AI at this stage in the life cycle of AI. I'm Ask me that
Yet.
question in another 5 years, you'll get a different answer. But
I
we
think in
cannot
another
rely
five
on
years,
AI.
AI will be on the call saying, "Oh, well, Charlotte could probably answer that. Let me connect you."
The question I have for you is: AI going to be you or me on this?
Right? Yeah, I know. It's so true. Hey, I think that, when we think about this idea of customer support, I think that we can all agree that customer support and recovery can play such a pivotal role in our businesses. Why does it seem like it's such an afterthought in most businesses?
I think in early stage business, the belief is that anyone can provide that support. So particularly when you're thinking about technology founders, you've often got the founders or the engineers answering the questions. They know the product,
Right.
they built it, they can answer the questions. What they generally aren't very good at is support. It's the business of being in support, the business of being a support human.
Right.
They can answer the tech, but as you grow, you need to be able to do that in a scalable way, in a human way, particularly at this end of the market where it's very, very conversational. The conversations run long and they run deep. That I think that it's an afterthought often because you can get away with it for a little while. I think that's ultimately where I've landed. You can just about get away with it. And then there comes a point where they realize they can't. And
Right.
that's when it feels. And I genuinely think that that's where it feels like you're spending money. And
Yeah.
that's why it feels, nobody would question that you need people to build a product or to run the business. But it's because it comes further down the natural life cycle of most products. I think it then feels like a cost.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I read an article once about Microsoft, about when they were first coming out with Windows. And they made this
Mm.
intuitive interface, but then people were so confused by it. And all the programmers would sit there and go, "Why are people so stupid?" And it wasn't until they brought users into the room to actually witness how people were using it that the actual developers were like, oh, I didn't know they perceived it that way. And so do you find that that's a lot of the kind of missteps or mishaps that are happening in businesses when it comes to customer support?
I think it's the ambition of most engineering and product leaders to do away with support by making the product so self-serve, so intuitive that you'll never ever need anyone in the business to talk to a customer again, right? Because the product will just do it all. But in that sense, the product is always in debt, I think. Like you're always playing catch up. I think it's very, very few products on the market, and I think they're probably not very complex products on the market that don't need any support at all. I mean, I can think of some very small footprint apps and things like that where it's so intuitive, and we all know there are companies out there who you almost never need to contact support for. Like they design from the beginning to like make it as intuitive as possible, but they get it wrong. That's why they need support people. That's why Apple and Microsoft and everyone else needs a support team.
Right. So when you talk about when they do it wrong, do you have any examples of how failing to prioritize the customer support can really end up costing the businesses more in the long run than in, oh, we don't need this at this stage kind of mindset?
I I think you used the right word early on. It's that recovery, right? No customer ever contacts your support team just because they're happy. Every time a customer calls the support team, they're already at a point of difficulty. They've already got a question that they can't answer themselves, or they're hitting some sort of challenge with the business or with the product or the technology. And so, for me, the recovery is what you need to really design for in the support experience. And the recovery is the way in which your support team, your support function, and how you design for that recovery is going to essentially prevent those customers walking away silently
Right.
or otherwise, silently or very shouty. Customers will walk away one way or another from a really poor support experience. And that can be one interaction, or it can be a series of interactions. But I think we've all had them, right? We all know those companies that have got so wound up, so angry. And we just never ever want to have anything to do with them again. And that's from, you know restaurants, banks, technology companies. We all have those experiences because we're all customers somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, the idea around wrapping one's head around this is, to your point, you have somebody who knows the product and the services that you're doing, but they think then it's just common sense. But how, like, I can imagine that many customers, like I alluded to at the opening, many customers just disappear. So how can managers identify when customers are becoming frustrated with the experience, whether that's the support or the delivery experience, even though they're not directly complaining to the people who could make a difference?
I think this is where data has to be where you begin. And I think a lot of support leaders will worry about what data they should collect. How are they collecting the right data? Is this the data that will help them connect those dots? And business leaders too. What can I get out of my customer interactions anywhere across the business? Um, my response to that is just start collecting data. Doesn't matter what it is at this point, right? It's important that you begin to understand how your customers are interacting with your business, and then you can begin to find correlations. And I know correlation isn't always causation, just to make that clear. But that the if you're not collecting any data, you're completely uninformed. If you start with what you can capture and look for stories, look for places you can influence, places that might give you clues to any frictions. Um, and that's through, all customer interactions, but it's very specifically, I know as a support leader, there's a ton of data in support. It's a hyper operational space in the business. Our tools capture all of that data for us most of the time. And so you just have to start digging into it. And I wouldn't worry about it being too systematic or expecting to make that data or like live forever. Just get a dashboard together from your CRM, or start writing start a Google sheet with some key things that you're observing, and begin to dig into it. And that's going to evolve over time significantly. But until you start, you're really just shooting in the dark.
Yeah. And I probably figure that people who are tuning into this, some of them have small mom and pop operations or small brick and mortar operations, and they're looking, oh, I know my customers. Eh, But,
Mm.
part of the challenge whenever I've come across these kind of entrepreneurs who are, I know my customers, when they're off in the back doing their thing and their customer service is happening front of house, whether that's retail, hospitality, whatever, they're making a lot of assumptions on
Mm.
how happy people are.
I think that's true. You have to spend time with the data, and if you haven't got a system, if you're not providing email support or whatever, if you are a restaurant, you have to observe it and capture it. And I think
Yeah.
that and find those moments where this is happening X number of times, or I spotted this, then this, and you have to look for those moments and start beginning to analyze them. You can only analyze if you have data to analyze in the first place. So again, it's a matter of like just capturing what you can to start.
So aside from not capturing data, are there some common mistakes that you see companies making when it comes to handling customer inquiries and complaints and service requests?
Yeah. Look, I think that, and I mean, I speak from bitter experience recently, but like,
Tell us a little bit about that. Why don't you tell us about
all
your
right,
experience?
I've got a really awful example of actually my bank. I was on vacation recently, and again, we've all got these stories, right? But for me, this was just about customer conversations not carrying pretty much from one phone call to the next. So I'm based in the UK. I don't know if the accent gives that away at all, but I was on in the US traveling, and I didn't think that in the modern era we had to tell our banks that we were traveling abroad anymore. I've been to the US multiple times without ever having informed my bank I was leaving the UK. Um, and then my card started getting declined, and Apple Pay started getting declined repeatedly. And I was 8 hours west from where I'm sat today, and and they closed at a particular time, and I basically had a 1 hour window in the morning, really, after waking up, where I could phone them live and try and get this problem solved, of my payments always being declined. And For a start, I think if you are expecting your customers to call you while they are traveling to a local line in the UK, be open when they're traveling. Be available when they're awake. Don't force them to contact you at particularly odd hours of day. And I had a series of frustrating conversations with my bank where I phoned on the first day and said, "Look, I'm traveling. There's a problem. Can you please just assume that for the next 11 days I'm in the US? I'm going to be traveling in the US. There's going to be payments being made from the US." And they said on day one, "Absolutely not a problem. You should have told us." But so I got a little bit of a telling off on the first on the first call. But here we are. We'll set the holiday flag on your account until such a date, and it'll all be fine from now on. The second day, I hit all the same problems. I phoned them again. They gave me the same spiel. The third day, I think I was okay. The fourth day, I had all the same problems. By about day, by about day seven, somebody told me that the date had been set incorrectly, and he also told me off again for not informing them that I was on holiday. Even though by this point I'd phoned them about 5 times from my holiday to tell them I was on holiday. And essentially, the disconnection, I was getting a different person every time. It was difficult to get in touch. They weren't very available. And the disconnection, because there was a clear, like, the systems weren't supporting them. The information I was providing wasn't sticking. And so I was hitting the same problem over and over again from several thousand miles away in a different time zone, in a different country, when I actually just wanted to be enjoying myself and not speaking to my bank every day, frankly. And I felt like there was for me, some clear moments which could have just been improved. There was the tone of some of the people I spoke to. There was the fact that they weren't very available, like having really UK centric office hours for essentially a travel team is a bit strange, I think. Um, and then the fact that the information I was providing wasn't sticking. Each one of these interactions was treated like a separate interaction. So I wasn't able to have a whole conversation that lasted and stuck. Um, I think if they'd fixed any one of those things, I would have had a much happier holiday. But the fact that I kept bumping into all three of those things um, ultimately leads me to question whether I want to stay with my bank, a bank that I've
Right.
been with for 20 years. And I will probably, to your point earlier, I probably will never phone up a kind of customer feedback or complaints line and give them all that feedback. I'll just leave.
Yes. And because it becomes a question of what is my time value to this problem, right?
Yeah.
It's so much easier to find out, oh, well, this other bank has so much better service. It's never happened, or it's very rare, and they're very kind, and so to make the change becomes so much easier just to turn around and say, you know what, why don't I just open up a new bank? I'll transfer everything over. I'll just deal with that. And then you
Yeah.
have CEOs somewhere going, I don't understand why our customers are dropping off. What's going on out there?
Exactly. And to your point, from the point of view of that other bank, they make it so easy. They help you switch all of your account, your payments, and everything. It's going to be one phone call to set up an account with them, and they want my business. They're going to
Yeah.
incentivize me to join them in every way possible. And my bank should be incentivizing me to stay rather than making it difficult, rather than building in all of those frictions. And I think that's a lack of design. For instance, just the opening hours of that call center, right? Who designed UK, very specifically, like short UK opening hours for a travel
Yes.
team?
Yes. Yeah.
There's a
And
lack of
again,
design thinking there.
the, I mean, you're mentioning a bank, but I can apply that to an experience I had with a telecom company, right? And so we all, I mean, just that one example, we've had that where we've had to go on call number 4. And then by the time you get on to call
Mm.
number 4, you're frustrated. Your frustration level is up. And it's not the person on the other end of the phone, but it's like, how many times do I have to repeat this problem? It's like, can't you look at my file and see what was written before? And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, that was under customer care. We are loyalty. And it's like, what?
Why are those two things different, right? Why are
Yeah,
they different?
yeah. I and it's just one of those things that makes you shake your head and just go, really? How easy would it be to just figure out how to connect all this information with the same kind of being able just to tap into and say, hey, we care about our customers. Because you got it on
Mm.
hold. Thank you very much for calling. You're caller number 23. We care very much about your call. It'll be another 22 callers.
And I I there is nothing more disingenuous, like to your very point there, than a recorded message that says we care about you.
Yes. Oh,
There was a British comedian many years ago who drew an analogy which I really loved, which was that you can buy certain types of, say, consumable, like a cookie or something. It will come in a pack, or almost anything. Like you can buy the kind of supermarket's own version of it, and then there's like the well-known brand, and then in the
yes.
corner there's some kind of thing that is neither of those two, and it's unfamiliar, but it's got the word luxury on it. And his point was, have you ever noticed how anything that says luxury on the packet isn't?
Yep. And
And I think
they
the same
use
is
the
true,
special
right?
font. And they use a special luxury font as well. Like it's probably in gold and it's nice and
Exactly so.
and,
Exactly so.
it's made some, by some like sweatshop in overseas or something. It's so funny. I'd love to dig into some strategies on how leaders can start evaluating and fine tuning their customer support processes, and we'll get to that right after this.
When the spotlight shines on your business, are customers applauding or yawning? In other words, how is your business performing? Make your business a star with the new book, Lights, Camera, Action, Business Operational Excellence Through the Lens of Live Theater by Marc Haine. Marc uses his business and acting experience to help you see your business like a live show, so you can create a performance your customers will never forget. Buy Lights, Camera, Action today at your favorite online retailer or directly at marchaine.com.
Welcome back. I am speaking with the fabulous Charlotte Ward, and we are having some head shake moments, I tell you. We're just coming up with stories, and it's like, we were talking just before going live about the fact that every one of us have had these really bad experiences. How come it's so prevalent in people's businesses? How come when they go out, a businessman goes out and goes to the airport and has a terrible experience with the airline and is shaking his head, but then customers are complaining about his business not giving really great service? How come there's this disconnect?
I think that's the biggest head scratcher of all,
Yeah,
Mark, if I'm
head shaker.
honest, right?
I
Head shaker, right? Yeah. I don't know if I have a straight answer to that one. Like, if I had the answer to that question, I'd be making much more money out of CX than I currently am. But I think some of it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that you need to spend time with the experience yourself and observe what's going on. And that observation can take so many forms. It can be standing in line with your customers. We know business leaders that have done that and do that. And they're very successful businesses, right? Or it can be looking at the data, or it's both. It should really be both ultimately in the long term. But unless you actually get some view on it, any kind of assumptions that you make about your own customer experience, the experience of your customers, are exactly that. They're assumptions.
Yes.
And who doesn't want to assume that the thing they've built, the thing they're doing, is all nice and fine and dandy, right?
Yeah. Well, and to your point, I did a study. It's 15 years ago now, but I did a study, and I polled through different businesses, and we asked the managers or the leaders of the business what they felt their customer satisfaction level was at, and they were like, "Oh, it's like 98%." And then when we talked to the staff were like, "Oh, it's like 72%." When we talked to the
Mm,
customers, it was like 16%. So
mm,
there's this whole waft of kind of blinders on that we really don't know. And so the big question then becomes is how do we properly assess this? And I love what you said about, stand in line, get on the service call and experience it as a client. One of the things that I do is I do secret shoppers. I'm always
mm.
fascinated that when I do a secret shopper report, the person who's leading that team or that department or that business gets their heckles all riled up about silly things like, what do you mean there's fingerprints on the door? Why the heck should I care if there's fingerprints on the door? And it's like, why are you getting upset over it? It's an observation. And so, how do we remove this ego from the process so
Mm.
that we are able to then look at the challenge in a light that we can put on this hat that we're here to serve? And here's some really good feedback, as opposed to, I don't know why they're picking on me. Don't they know how busy we are? And look how many customers we have to serve.
Yeah, it's the inside out view, isn't it? And really, we need to be looking outside in. And I think I think it takes resilience for support teams, for customer experience teams, for business leaders to get used to the outside in view.
Hmm. And so,
Um,
what does that resilience look like?
so I think part of it is built by standing in line and just listening to the people around you, you know.
Right.
And I think also doing the observations, whatever form that takes, enough so that you can begin to correlate. Again, there's that word, correlate
Hmm.
certain things you are noticing, data points you have, with the outcome of that customer experience, which will be a negative CSAT return or a customer leaving your business and never coming back. If you manage to notice that customers aren't coming back, it's a great data point to collect.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but I think that builds up that should be the process that you go through. And I hope that if you go through that process, it begins to open your mind and ears to some of the feedback that you're talking about. Because the feedback, whether it's given by a secret shopper or by a real customer, is far more, like, the verbatim feedback is far more valuable actually than any CSAT survey return where you give a 1 to 5 or a smiley face or not.
The comments are more important than the star rating, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. One of the things I have on my website is I have a customer touchpoint assessment that I developed it because I got tired of kind of people coming in. Like we can't see the label from inside the jar. And I think a lot of people get
Mm-hmm.
so surrounded by their operations, by their processes, that they're actually getting blinded by everything. And so the customer touchpoint was designed that you can actually put on the lens of your client, do a walkthrough, and actually go through a checklist of touch points that the
Mm.
customers are experiencing so that we could tweak it. Do you think that's something like that's a good start if somebody wanted to kick this off?
Absolutely, absolutely. Any tools that you've got, and yours especially, Mark,
Oh,
to
why?
get out
Why?
there
Thank you so much.
and give you that perspective, right? Because perspective, it's what it's about. And I think that this perspective, this perception that we have from the inside, fuels. It fuels a a a different kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I think we get a different measure of what I would call the expectation gap.
Hmm.
We think we know what our customers want, and we think we're delivering it from the inside, and maybe we've got an idea of where there are gaps, because if you're really honest, you'll at least admit some gaps in your business.
Well,
um, but so we can try to fill them, right? But the gaps look so much wider from the outside, and that's because our customers don't have the same expectations and the same perspective that we have, and
right.
that's why, to your point, you have business leaders who say I've got CSAT of 95% and customers who are saying 16.
Yeah. It's Terrible. This idea of I'm a big fan that we should always be looking forward with our businesses. Like I'm all about failing forward. So being able to recognize where we're lacking, but then being able to kind of use that failure to generate excellence. Can you
Mm.
share this idea of retrospecting customer service experiences? What does that mean to you? How do we initiate something that we're able to look back, but do it in a way that is structured, it's productive, and it's evaluative,
Mm.
as opposed to, again, the whole ego trip thing of, oh, customers, my customer, they don't know what they're talking about.
This is the technologist in me coming out. This is the DevOps kind of retrospective process that we live and breathe at Snowplow, and we live and breathe it through, perceived operational difficulties, as well as obviously product issues, and it's a managed service, so anything in terms of the availability of our service too. We take that through the experience. So if we have one perception, one idea where there might be a gap, we will look to run, it's essentially a meeting. Like, it begins with a meeting. Let's get together and look at all of the internal stakeholders and the customer too, if they're willing. Let's talk to them about what they felt here, about what they saw here. When we run those internal meetings, from the DevOps world, these are truly blameless. And like, we live and breathe the word blameless when it comes to those kind of retrospectives. So we don't point to people, we just point to systems. We don't ask why didn't you, we ask why didn't the system support you too. And 5 whys is a critical part of a good retrospective. And so we ask why questions rather than point fingers too. But it's crucial that you can go deep, and the easy way to go deep is to keep it blameless, because that stops everyone being defensive. They know we're trying to get to the system answer and not the people answer as far as possible.
I love that. And I think that right there, if somebody gets their knickers in a twist because they're getting a certain amount of feedback, this is a perfect way of being able to look at it and saying, oh, how can we do this in a blameless way? Why can't we just look at the situation? Let's define the situation without saying the customer's wrong or we're wrong, or, the staff were
Mm.
wrong or whatever. I do truly believe that when you are pointing a finger at somebody, you're pointing 3 fingers at yourself. So I think, I
You're
think
not
that's a,
wrong. You're not wrong.
I think that's a brilliant
Yeah.
metaphor.
And I think the for me, the phrase that we should all be on the alert for in any of those discussions is, why didn't you? Why didn't you pay more attention? Why didn't you remember that?
Yeah.
Why didn't you do that thing? Because I would have done that thing, is really the inference of what we're saying there. And
Yeah.
the question to ask is, really, the customer didn't get this. Let's say it's a missing email or something, right? Like, customer didn't get this email. Why didn't the customer get this email? And
Right.
okay, somebody might initially admit to, well, I just forgot to send it. Okay, you don't say then, why didn't you send it? It's like, why didn't
How did
we
we
put you in
miss
a
it?
position? Yeah, why didn't we put you in a position to be able to send it at the right time? Or, and you talk about the systems, not the
Yes.
people, and
And
that's
then what
that's
needs
the
to
way to
happen?
keep.
What needs to happen to be able to do it properly the next time?
Exactly. And that's how you build process. That's how you build operations that make these. And like, this is in technology, this is a huge concern of mine constantly, is how we make these repeatable. And that's a customer experience desire as well, is making those repeatable, consistent experiences. But the same is doubly true in terms of like delivering technical support.
Right.
It's important that we do the same thing every time, and that we're always trying to do better. That sort of constant quest for improvement.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is absolutely fascinating. Could you let everybody know how they can get in touch with you if this is resonating with them and they need your help?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. That's the simplest way to get in touch with me. Find me on LinkedIn. So I'm Charlotte Ward. You can find me through Snowplow. I'm host of the Customer Support Leaders podcast, as you kindly mentioned at the start. So if you head over to customersupportleaders.com, you'll also find me there.
And we will put the link to that podcast in the show notes as well, because if you're this brilliant on my podcast, I can't imagine how brilliant you are on yours. Hey,
You're very kind. You're very kind.
I can imagine that people tuning in might be rolling their eyes and thinking, this whole thing about support, this is going to cost me a ton of money. If I have to start spending money on this cost, in your experience, how can a company shift from seeing this customer support angle as an expense, from being an expense to viewing it as being a part of their investment structure?
Well, one of my, I'd love to say that one of my favorite sayings of all time, but it's a saying that I really only invented a couple of weeks ago.
So you had a moment of
But
genius 2 weeks ago. Who's going to hold that
moment,
against you?
just counting. Just one of many, Mark, just one of many. But I hit on this kind of notion that customer support is going to cost you money, or it's going to cost you money. And, ultimately, we do have to accept that there is a cost to providing excellent service, excellent experience, excellent engagement with our product or business. There is a cost to that. Otherwise, why, if businesses could do this for free, we'd all be making a lot more money and we'd all be entrepreneurs. So call it what you want, whether it's support or experience or success. Where you are providing a service and engaging with your customers is going to cost you money. And support is just one of those, because customers, as we established at the start, customers are always going to have problems and questions. They always need someone to talk to. Now, there are obviously ways you can reduce that cost. But ultimately, your aim should be to stop the leaky bucket, to retain those customers, the customers that are costing you money in a different way by leaving
by
your
leaving.
business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the equation that people have to figure out is if you lose a customer who, let's say yourself with your bank example, if that bank loses you as a customer, we have the lifetime spend of a particular customer. What will they lose for the next 15 years? Because you were unhappy with how they treated you while you were traveling. What does that cost them? Right. And so what will it cost them then to have a good process in place to be able to save that relationship and keep you as a loyal customer going forward?
And we've talked about operations and process quite heftily because I'm in technical support. It's very technical. We apply a lot of process and procedure to making it scalable and making it repeatable. But the fact is that you'll always need people to do that. So the process isn't going to answer every single, question around scalability for you, because some things just don't scale. You're going to have to apply some people to it. And that dynamic, that rate of spend, if you like, changes depending on the business significantly, obviously. But the people are always going to be really your biggest cost, and you have to set up an environment where they can succeed. So you have to put those operations in place. You have to invest in tools and retrospectives and process and data, and all of that is an investment as well as your people. But really what you're doing is you're setting your people up to succeed, because if you can automate away anything, if you can make your customers self-serve, that's great. It means that those customers aren't really engaging with your business, which is great for the customers in many ways. But the ones who do come to you, you want to build an environment where they can really build relationships with the people that they're talking to. And so it's important that any operations or any tooling you put in place, your people can kind of zigzag around as well, and that they're allowed to be people. And I think that's really critical. And that does cost money.
Yep. When in my example with the telecom companies, my experience was that I had warned them that I had a better offer from somebody else, and they said, "Oh, there's nothing we can do." And so then I switched, and then for weeks afterwards, I would get somebody calling me up and saying, "Oh, I want to give you a special offer," and it's like, "But I gave you the opportunity. I gave you 2 weeks notice that I was looking at switching over, and gave you the opportunity. Oh well, we can't give everybody the power to make the offers." And
Right.
it's like, so when it comes down to this idea of kind of investing in our people, when these are the people on the front line talking to a customer that is dissatisfied, why aren't we empowering them to do what's necessary within the scope of our business, overall business? Why do we have to say, okay, then I want to talk to your manager, and then you talk to the manager. I want to talk to your loyalty department, and then you talk to the loyalty department. I want to talk to your supervisor. Why does it have to be so hard?
Mm. It is hard, and it shouldn't be. But there are businesses out there who get it right. And I'm going to tell you another story now, actually, while we're here, if that's all right,
Sure,
Mark.
please. Let's hear
The
about somebody
story
who
is
does it really well, because that was my
somebody
next
does it really
question was,
well.
what does success look like when we do this right?
Right. And when you empower your people to make those kind of decisions in the moment and not bounce you around the business to try and get, to try and retain the business. For me, a company that does this really well is Airbnb. Believe it or not, same holiday, just a few weeks ago. I booked an Airbnb for the second half of my stay. It was a 2-city break, and for the second half, I booked an Airbnb. Now, Airbnb is obviously a two-sided marketplace effectively, and they're not in control, unlike a hotel chain, of the experience you have when you walk into any one of their hosts' homes, right? Any one of their host properties. And that's fine. I get that. I'm buying into that. I'm buying into the service as I expect it to be, because I know what Airbnb's service is as an offering. I know what I'm buying. I know it's not their responsibility to ensure the floors have been cleaned or whatever. They can only guarantee what they can guarantee, and they can't guarantee for any of their properties, whether they're a superhost or anything, what you see when you open the door. And what I saw when I opened the door late in the afternoon of my second city on my trip to the US was a property that hadn't been cleaned. There were still wet towels everywhere. The beds hadn't been made. The floor was dirty. It was a lovely apartment, but the kitchen was pretty filthy. I just didn't want to stay there. Some you might call me fussy, maybe, but I didn't really want to sleep in the sheets that somebody else had slept in for a start and use the wet towels. So I did what every good guest should do under these circumstances. I took a completely in the moment video walkthrough on my phone. So I had the evidence. So I'm being a good customer at this point. I'm providing all of the evidence. I'm not going to make it hard for them. And I, on the app, very easy, get hold of support. I got a lovely response. We're so sorry that you've had this experience. I'm lucky enough to have a friend in that city, and I went and hung out at their house for an hour while I had this kind of chat with Airbnb. And it was all done in the app, so there was no voice, but it was a live, personable interaction. I said I can't stay there. They entered into a long, very open chat about what I would like to do. Would I like to engage like another property on the platform that they would do all the searches for me. They didn't make me do any of the legwork. They said, here are some that are available today. We can get you booked in. Not only that, we'll give you a voucher for it, so you don't have to spend money on it. So they refunded my experience, and they gave me a voucher for another property. Now, as it happens, because I was visiting that friend who doesn't have a spare room, I wanted to be quite close, so I didn't want to be on the other side of the city. And so I said, unfortunately, none of those properties that thank you very much. And they gave me about 8 properties that were as close as they could manage that were available that day. But none of them were suitable. They were just too far away, This was San Francisco. It's Fleet Week. So, all of the armed services are in. Every property in the city is practically taken. They were doing their best. I said, I'm going to phone around some hotels and see what I can find. And actually, a couple of streets away, there was a tiny hotel that had a spare room that night, but only for one night of my 5 nights in the city. Airbnb said, absolutely fine. We will give you a contribution to the cost of that hotel because you're leaving the platform. You're not going into another Airbnb property. We can't reimburse. I think this is reasonable, the whole hotel stay. But we'll give you a contribution towards it. And they gave me enough for a couple of nights of the 5 nights that I'd intended to stay in the city, which I thought was great. However, the hotel, and I was chatting to them, the hotel that I booked into only had 1 night. I had to go and find another hotel for 2 nights and then come back to this hotel for 2 nights more. So I was moving around. So bear in mind, at this point, they've refunded my original experience. They've offered and done all of the legwork for me in terms of finding an alternative on their platform. I refused. I went and found my own accommodation, which they've contributed significantly towards. It's already a pretty damn good experience, right? Given that I was lugging my suitcases around San Francisco for 5 days. Every day of that holiday, they checked in on the app to ask if I was safe and how I was doing, and did I need any
Wow.
more help. And for me, that's a whole other level.
So to those people tuning in right now, I think this is probably the most value you're going to get out of this episode is this idea that once you solve somebody's problem, there are steps you can take to make it magical so that you
Hmm.
get the same feeling that I mean to understand that it actually felt like they cared about you.
Yeah.
It wasn't just another transaction.
It wasn't. And, I was speaking to a real person the whole time. It's a highly novel problem, not unlike the kind I see at work every day, right? This
Mhm.
isn't an AI kind of can I check in early question, which I know they've got a bot and I could probably get some of those questions answered myself. But this was a really, really personal problem. The people I was in touch with through the app, and I spoke to 2 or 3 customer support providers at Airbnb. I had their name every single time. They told me what time their shift ended and when they would call me, or when they would be back on that chain with, a check-in. And they handed over, and this is like where the bank failed me by contrast, the handover between supporting reps and support shifts was basically seamless. It was one conversation. I was obviously aware of speaking to different people, actually, which is also a nice touch because it didn't look like I was speaking to some avatar all the
Right.
time. But
Right.
but also that they maintained that level of care beyond the life of the issue,
Right.
effectively, to your point. And for me, yes, it's magical. These kind of support experiences can make or ruin a customer's day. In the mornings, I was having the bank ruining my day, and every evening Airbnb were making it wonderful. And for me, that was the contrast. It was literally night and day in terms of support experiences.
And it would be so easy for you to lose trust in the brand because you walked into this apartment that was filthy and you were let down, and had they just shrugged and said, "Oh, there's nothing we can do," you would really think twice about booking Airbnb. In fact, if you told us that was the end result, we'd be looking at it and going, "Well, I know this lady Charlotte who had a really bad experience. Do I really want to take a chance on my trip to book something and not
Mm.
be right?" But instead now, not only have they ensured that you will be calling them again and using their service again, but now you've just communicated it out to the world that this was
Hmm.
a pretty darn good experience, and that if we're traveling, we should maybe consider Airbnb.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah,
I would have no qualms of using them again. I mean, there are, as I said, I know they're not in control of every minute of the experience when you're there.
right,
That's their value prop, right? They aren't a hotel chain, but they
right.
made it feel like they were.
Yeah, yeah, and ultimately, I think that's a lesson that we can learn from in every facet of what we do. Um, when we talk about this idea that we have these organizations that have the ability to create this, can we talk about the value that training plays in making something like this happen? Because I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and
Mm.
training again is just another expense. And there's that funny little cliche about what happens if I train them and they leave, and then the response is, well, what happens if you don't train them and they stay? Um, right? Which is so. So can we talk a little
It's
bit
true.
about how we should be looking at this and quantifying the value of training?
You know, I sadly think that is just it, right? I think it's the value of training is in the risk of not doing it, and the value of almost anything. When you're talking about return on investment, you're talking really about it either makes you money or it stops money walking out the door, and
Yeah.
ultimately that's how you justify the cost, is applying the return that you'll get on that cost. And the return in this kind of case is not losing customers, or it's in customers that stick with you for longer. And all of that goes back to the data point, right? You have to begin watching how your customers are behaving in the business, how they're interacting with your support reps, looking for those moments of friction where you need I'll call it a quality adjustment in your support experience, one
I
way or
like
another.
that. I like
Whether
that quality adjustment.
whether it's operational, or whether it's that, like going beyond, going above and beyond. And I would. I I haven't spoken to any of the leaders in Airbnb support for a very long time, but I know they didn't arrive at that service on day one. You know,
Right.
they iterated, um, and we all have to do that. We all have to watch our customers and iterate. And you know, training is just a part of that. Like the way that your reps treat your customers in terms of you know, guiding them through the business or talking to them or solving their problems. So much of that at a people level is trained.
Mhm.
Um, whatever that training looks like, then we have to be able
Well,
to understand why
and
we're doing anything.
putting on my leadership hat, I would say yes, it's trained, but then it's also modeled by the leaders because
Oh, sure.
how leaders treat their staff is going to be directly proportional to how the staff will treat your customers, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's two sides of the same coin. For the people who are tuning into this and kind of nodding along with what we're saying, if somebody knows that they need to do quality adjustments to their support, what cautionaries and pitfalls should they be aware of as they try to make this change?
I think this comes back to a little of what we were saying earlier, but you know, don't develop an echo chamber. Don't. I think talking about quality in your support experience is critical, but it has to account for all perspectives. So if you're only just really measuring your quality from the inside and actually not tying it to any of the experiences and only measuring it according to your own expectations and building that echo chamber where everything sounds great, aren't we doing very well? It's next to useless as a quality program at that point. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, the whole celebratory thing because you get one thing right and then you think, oh well, look how great we are, is wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Charlotte, this has been really fantastic. Could you remind everybody one more time how they can get a hold of you?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn or more directly through customersupportleaders.com.
Lovely. And as we wrap up, do you have any last thoughts about what we're talking about? Have we missed anything, Charlotte?
Oh, I think I would just really encourage our listeners to get started because I
Yeah.
think, as I said right at the top, we can easily get caught in the trap of thinking too much about it. And while design is important and while applying the right data is important, getting started is even more important than either of those things.
Yeah. And would it be fair to say get started even though you're going to make mistakes, just get started? Because I think if the intent is there,
Absolutely.
I think even customers will figure out if you're sincere about the intent to want to create great service, that they will be forgiving in a lot of different realms, even if you trip and fall.
Absolutely. And to your
Yeah.
point, this is part of the modeling. You know, as leaders, if we're beginning to look at how our customers are behaving in the business, you're signaling to your team that we're looking at how customers behave around the business and how, you know, we can do better for them. And if you start signaling and modeling that for your team because you're talking about it, because you're collecting data, because you're standing in line, your team are going to be very motivated to make the customer's life just happier every day too.
Mhm. Yeah. Charlotte, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. Obviously, your passion shows through and your expertise shows through. It's just been a brilliant conversation. Thank you for making time today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It has been brilliant. Uh, if you have any questions about today's episode, or maybe you're thinking, hey, we could really use a complimentary 30-minute brainstorming session with Marc or Charlotte, well, good news. You can snag a spot on my calendar. Just hit the link that is in the show notes, the one that's marked meetwith.marchaine.com. If you'd like to connect with Charlotte, her contact information is also in the show notes. We are dedicated to supporting businesses just like yours. So if you are thinking about supporting a leadership retreat or doing a convention or conference and you think you need a couple of experts to help you along the way, please feel free to reach out to us. Charlotte and I are available to serve you, make sure that your audience is fulfilled, and make sure that we live and breathe and model the very best practices. And if you haven't done so yet, why don't you make sure that you subscribe to this feed and follow me on social media? And please be sure to tune in next week when my guest will be Sean Grace talking about the power of really great questions. So join me, won't you? Thank you for joining me today. My name is Marc Haine. I hope you stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope you dare to be the exception.